Hi guys, welcome back to our channel, Adventures of Carlien. Today we are talking about one of my favorite things, bread. And not just any kind of bread, we're talking about milk bread today. So if you've never had it, I would say milk bread is like a softer, fluffier version of your typical American sandwich bread. And it caters a little bit more to the Asian palate, which is used to like fluffy, moist, soft rice. So if you can kind of guesstimate that relationship or that equivalent or that taste, that's what we're searching for when we're making good milk bread or when we're searching for getting good milk bread. And in this series, we are trying to figure out the best recipe out there. So we're gonna run this experiment and test all of the popular recipes online, put them head to head and then compare them and then decide which one's our favorite and if it needs any tweaking or if it's good to go as it is. For milk bread, you do not need any kind of starter. It's actually a very simple bread to make, especially if you have a stand mixer, because then you don't have to do any kneading by yourself. But many of the more popular recipes do call for a starter, which is known as either yudane or Tangzhong, which I'll have my mother say because I can't really say it properly.
Tangzhong.
Tangzhong. I'm putting my Chinese people to shame right now. So anyways, this starter, or this water roux as they call it, there's a little bit of a dispute on its origins. And that's not surprising, but I think if we look at sort of the word itself or the characters itself, I have a theory at least. So my parents are Chinese and my sister-in-law is Taiwanese. And so when we kind of talked about this Tangzhong, the characters itself don't really, like, it's not a word that makes a lot of sense in Chinese. It's sort of like soup and then starter. Or like planting, the verb, the action to plant. And so my theory at least is that it must probably mean something more in Japanese. And if that is the case, then its origin must actually be Japanese, and it's simply an adaptation that Chinese have taken, inspiration from Japanese breads, especially since in Taiwan, they do have a lot of Japanese influence. So that's the theory. Yudane or Tangzhong is the same word, same exact characters, although different meaning and slightly different meaning, and more importantly, a different method. So yudane is made by boiling water and flour. And that boiling water is sort of like an instant cooking of the starches and helps to build protein. Whereas the Tangzhong is you're mixing some flour and water and possibly milk and then cooking it until it becomes like a smooth paste. So you'll notice that yudane with its almost 1-to-1 ratio is a little bit grittier and more like paste. And then the Tangzhong, which has a higher liquid ratio, will have a much smoother, actually I don't know, it's like a good analogy for it, but it's a much smoother paste. You're not going to get anything sandy or lumpy or anything like that. Both are very easy to do, not a lot of like extra time one end or the other. So we're going to test some recipes using both methods. So this time around, we're just going to test one recipe that's really popular that uses the yudane method, and then another that uses the Tangzhong method, and just get our hands wet in this milk bread world and give it a try, and then just kind of see if we found one method, more preferable than the other, or, if one recipe is just that much significantly different. So I know it's not really comparing apples to apples, but I think it will be a good introduction to milk bread in general and making milk bread. So let's get into the kitchen. I forgot to mention which recipes we're testing today. We're trying Umi's baking, and I'm sorry if I said that wrong, but it's a really, really popular recipe on YouTube that uses the Tangzhong method, and then also a Chopsticks Chronicle recipe, which utilizes the yudane. So let's go. To make milk bread, you're gonna need milk, sugar, dry instant yeast, unsalted butter, bread flour, salt, and boiling water. To start, make your yudane by mixing 50 grams of flour with 40 milliliters of boiling water, then set that aside. In a stand mixer, add 150 milliliters of milk, 15 grams of sugar, 3 grams of yeast, 10 grams of butter, give that a mix, and then add your yudane. Then add your 200 grams of flour and 5 grams of salt. Mix everything on low until all the ingredients are combined. Then turn the speed up to 5 or 6, and then let it mix for about 20 minutes. Once the dough starts to get smooth and come away from the bowl, or passes the window pane test, like you can stretch it without breaking it, it's ready. Take the dough out from the stand mixer and plop it onto your workstation. Then you can grease a separate bowl or the same bowl and set it aside. Then take your dough and shape it into a bowl. You can do this by circling it on the table or just picking it up and tucking it underneath itself until it shapes into a ball. Then place it into your greased bowl and cover it and allow it to rest for about 45 to an hour or until it doubles in size. In the meantime, grease your loaf pan. To check your dough's readiness, do the finger test. Dust your finger, give it a belly button, and if the belly button stays there, it's ready. Then punch down the dough to give it some more oxygen, scrape it out of the bowl, and then flatten it out so we can divide it into 2 even pieces. Then we're going to basically do the same exact thing as we did the first round. You're going to shape each piece into a bowl, either rolling it on the table or tucking it underneath itself. And then when both balls are shaped, we're going to put them back into the bowl, cover them, and let them rest for another 20 minutes. When they're ready, we'll take them out of the bowl. No worries if they're stuck together, just go ahead and separate them. Then we're going to flatten each piece, spread it out, and then basically fold it in thirds. You don't have to be very precise here. Once you've made the fold, give it a little pat down and then roll it up perpendicular to your folds. At the very end, go ahead and close up your seam by pinching the ends together. Then place the rolled dough into your pan and repeat with the other piece. When you're done with both, give it a cover and allow it to rest for another 30 minutes. Once it's risen, you can optionally brush an egg wash over the dough. Then bake it at 365 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 to 30 minutes. Once it's done, remove it from the tin and let it cool on a rack. Next, we'll go over Umi's recipe. Start by making the Tangzhong. Mix 40 grams of flour with 200 grams of water in a saucepan. Once it's thoroughly mixed, go ahead and turn on the heat to medium and keep stirring until that mixture thickens to a paste. Then remove it and set it aside. In your stand mixer, mix 290 grams of flour, 30 grams of sugar, 6 grams of salt, 5 grams of yeast, and 5 grams of dry milk. Give that a mix and then slowly add in 130 grams of milk, your 25 grams of egg, and your Tangzhong. Once that's combined, add your 25 grams of butter and continue to mix at a low speed. Once that's all incorporated, turn the speed up to high and mix for about 15 to 20 minutes or until the dough sticks together. Once the dough starts to look smooth or it passes the window pane test, it's ready to go. Scrape it out of the stand mixer and plop it onto your workstation. Once again, we're going to shape it into a bowl or a smooth round ball. You can either work it against the table, or if it's a little too sticky like mine turned out, you can also tuck it underneath itself. Then place it into a greased bowl, cover it, and let it rest for 45 to 60 minutes. In the meantime, grease your loaf pan. Then do the finger test to check the dough's readiness. When it's ready, go ahead and punch it down, scrape it out of the bowl, and then roll it out or flatten it out again so we can divide it into 3 even pieces. Then we'll go ahead and shape those 3 individual pieces into bowls all over again. If your dough is a little bit sticky, it might be easier to tuck them under once again. When you have your 3 smooth pieces, go ahead and place them into the bowl covered, or you can even let them just rest on the table as long as they're covered. After about 15 minutes, we're going to go ahead and shape them for the loaf. So once again, we'll flatten them out, fold them into thirds, and then roll them up, and then close up the seams. Repeat for all 3 pieces, and then load up your loaf pan. Then cover them and let it rest for about 30 minutes. Once it's risen, you can also optionally add an egg wash here. Then bake at 355 degrees Fahrenheit for about 25 to 30 minutes. Once it's done, remove it from the tin and allow it to cool on a rack. Now for the comparison. First, we started with the squish test. Umi's bread didn't quite bounce all the way back, whereas Chopsticks Chronicles did bounce all the way back. So just a little more elasticity here. But other than this difference, there wasn't an obvious distinction between either bread. So let's go ahead and slice the bread and take a look inside. We'll start with Umi's bread. The crumb is nice and neat, without a lot of big air pockets or holes. Slicing it on the first day, you're going to need a sharp knife. Next, we'll look at Chopsticks Chronicles. Again, similar crumb, not a lot of big air pockets, and so soft it's pretty hard to slice. Okay, so today's recipes turned out pretty good. I didn't find a really strong distinct difference in terms of, the yudane or the Tangzhong coming out more, delicious. I think it kind of is personal preference as always. Both breads on the first day, right when you bake them, are so good. You can't beat fresh out of the oven bread. But I will say that on the next day, after you've let it cool significantly, both of the breads would get a little bit denser, a little bit chewier, and the Chopstick Chronicles, or the yudane bread, had a more sort of even, fluffier chew, whereas the one from Yumi ended up being a little bit more gummy. So it's so moist that it kind of melts in your mouth and then kind of becomes gummy, as opposed to any sort of chew that you can chew on. So that would be the only strong difference. The flavor's not really different. There's not a lot more sweetness in one or the other. So I think it is a little bit of preference. If you really want melt in your mouth bread, you want something super moist, then maybe just lean towards the Tangzhong or Umi's recipe, at least in this case. But if you're looking for something a little bit more with a chew, and you want something that maybe is more like a sandwich bread that might hold up a little bit, I mean, neither is really going to hold really well on its own. You probably have to toast it to give it just a little bit more firmness, but I would probably choose the Chopstick Chronicles yudane recipe. That's it for today. Next time we're gonna compare apples to apples, because we're gonna use Princess Bamboo, who's also very popular on YouTube, and we're gonna test her recipe, which has the same exact recipe, but just parsed out for the yudane or the Tangzhong ratios. So that will be a much better comparison between the two techniques. All right, guys, thanks for watching. As always, if you enjoyed, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to follow, and also join us on Cene, where we can chat about breads and all the other favorite things that we have. All right, use the link in the description, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye! Yudane uses hot or boiling water and flour. Good job!